Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Yasmin Khan, and I'm here with Wosny Lambre, but you all know Woz. Woz, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic. Happy to be on with you guys.
Thank you very much. We have a packed show for you guys tonight. Jenk and Anna are both out, so that's why you have me and Woz tonight, but I promise it'll be a good time. Maybe. I mean, the stories are a little crazy, but with that, without further ado, since we have so many stories to get to, let's roll the tape on this first one.
He is not coming back to our country. President Bukele said he was not sending him back. That's the end of the story. If he wanted to send him back, we would give him a plane ride back. There was no situation ever where he was going to stay in this country. None. He would have come back, had one extra step of paperwork, and gone back again. But he's from El Salvador, he's in El Salvador, and that's where the president plans on keeping him.
So this morning, Attorney General Pam Bondi doubled down on Donald Trump's insistence that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man mistakenly deported to El Salvador in violation of a judge's order, will remain in a mass prison there despite having never committed a crime or been convicted of a crime. But Bondi and the Trump administration are facing a fight because the federal judge in charge of Abrego Garcia's deportation case is not backing down. Yesterday, Judge Paula Zinnes scolded the administration for dragging its feet in complying with a Supreme Court order that directed the White House to quote unquote facilitate Garcia's return, telling a lawyer for the Justice Department. So here's what the judge actually said. She said, to date, what the record shows is that nothing has been done, nothing. Now she's ordered an intense 2-week inquiry into the Trump administration's refusal to seek his return. So this is from the New York Times, noting that every passing day was another that Abrego Garcia, a 29-year-old father of 3, suffered harm in Salvadoran custody. The judge set up a fast schedule for officials to provide documents and sit for depositions. We're going to move, she said. There will be no tolerance for gamesmanship or grandstanding. There are no business hours while we do this. Cancel vacations, cancel other appointments. I'm usually pretty good about things like that in my court, but not this time. So I expect all hands on deck. So she's not suffering any fools anymore. Her ruling means that senior Trump administration officials will be forced to testify about their failure to take action. And it's really not so much a failure as it is just a refusal to take that action. It's willful and obstinate subordination. But in a written order granting expedited discovery, Zinnes said 4 senior officials from the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State will have to sit for depositions by April 23rd, essentially out-of-court interviews in which the officials will have to answer questions under oath from Abrego Garcia's lawyers. Abrego Garcia's lawyers will also be allowed to ask the government for relevant documents about the case. At this point, 3 courts, including the Supreme Court, have ruled, the Supreme Court, by the way, was unanimous, that the White House is required to take at least some steps toward freeing Abrego Garcia. But despite initially actually admitting that he had been deported by mistake, the Trump administration is still falsely insisting that he is an MS-13 gang member that should have been sent back to El Salvador. And we talked about this on yesterday's show. Those claims are incredibly misleading, and the judge recently argued that the evidence against him was completely vague and unreliable. This morning, when Pam Bondi was pressed to release whatever evidence they allegedly had, she would not share any details. Take a look.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia in Maryland. He's in a prison now in El Salvador. He was sent there. You insist, the president, everybody in the administration insists that he's MS-13. It appears that there's not going to be any sort of trial. He's not going to come back. DHS said he would be arrested and redeported if he comes back. Why not show the American people the evidence that he's MS-13 so they can make an informed decision? And why not show the public the evidence?
Well, he is an illegal alien who has been living illegally in our country from El Salvador. ICE testified, an immigration judge ruled he was a member of MS-13. An appellate judge ruled he was a member of MS-13. Hard stop. He should not be in our country.
Again, that is not entirely accurate. But if you want to see all of the receipts, we got you. And I encourage you to go back and watch our segment from yesterday, which is linked in the description box down below. Waz, we're going to get into the vice president's response to all of this in a little bit. And it is truly, I think, unwell is the word I'm going to go with there. But what's so baffling about this story to me is the fact that at first they sort of acknowledged their mistake, but then they were like, you know what, we just have to double down on everything because I don't know what mistakes are weakness, or if they admit to have made a mistake, then it's like, obviously, this is a poorly thought out and poorly executed plan that we now have to cop to. What do you think?
Well, they fired the guy who came out and said we made a mistake by deporting this person. I think the only look, I don't know anybody in the Trump administration. I just go off of what's actually out there in the public record. And it feels like what they're doing is an attempt to have the most muscular, sort of outwardly powerful response to what I would say is literally the only mandate that the Trump administration has is that mass deportation, or getting rid of a lot of the people that came to the country under the Biden administration, is broadly popular. There's like a 55 to 60% approval for it. It's literally the only thing, the only leg they have to stand on. And they think, because of that, they need to show, basically a show of force that we will recklessly throw you in a freaking gulag in South America. The problem that they have is that they have no credibility here. One, we know that net deportations are flat, meaning Joe Biden was deporting the same amount of people as the Trump administration at similar rates. And two, they don't have the goods. All of these gang members, all of these violent criminals, all of these illegal aliens who are, poisoning America's streets and making our children unsafe and, threatening to kill our babies in their cribs. They don't have a shred of evidence. The one guy they said was an MS-13 ringleader in Virginia. They said, oh, he was like a kingpin and coordinated this. All they got him on was a gun charge. They got the governor of Virginia to show up to this guy's trial. Basically, he was a show pony. Like, look, we got a ringleader. Nothing. They don't have a wiretap. They don't have pictures. They don't have snitches. Fellow MS-13 guys that are like, no, this was my boss. They have nothing. And so all they can fall back on is this double down because they've been caught with their pants down. There's just no substance here. And the crazy thing for them is that the one thing that is broadly popular about their entire harebrained agenda, they are losing credibility on it by the day. They're sending barbers, they're sending makeup artists, instead of like, all right, go to the jails where these guys are in county lockup, or these guys are on Rikers Island or something like that, and they're awaiting trial and it's for violent crimes. I would scoop those guys up. I bet you the country would be broadly behind even this crazy non-due process thing. But they're not. They literally can't come up with these people.
Yeah, and I thought it was funny also, and I mentioned this on yesterday's show, but they did have one instance recently of terrorism that was actually reported as being terrorism in the news, but that was that MAGA guy who set Governor Shapiro's house on fire in Pennsylvania. He was charged with terrorism. So, I mean, they really just have to build this whole narrative around terrorism and gang violence because they know that if people are afraid enough, then they will support things, and they will, including things like the suspension of due process. But actually, speaking of due process, while some in the administration are now just like, some people, including the vice president, they're just pretending that due process just really isn't that important, or it isn't anything that needs to happen in illegal immigration cases specifically. Of course, the issue there is that you don't know if people are illegal or criminals without that due process. But in a long diatribe on X, Vice President JD Vance wrote this. He says, to say the administration must observe due process is to beg the question, what process is due is a function of our resources, the public interest, the status of the accused, the proposed punishment, and so many other factors. To put it in concrete terms, Opposing the death penalty on an American citizen requires more legal process than deporting an illegal alien to their country of origin. Here's a useful test. Ask the people weeping over the lack of due process what precisely they propose for dealing with Biden's millions and millions of illegals. And with reasonable resource and administrative judge constraints, does their solution allow us to deport at least a few million people per year? If the answer is no, they've given away their game. They're giving their game away. They don't want border security. They don't want us to deport the people who have come into our country illegally. They want to accomplish through fake legal process what they failed to accomplish politically, the ratification of Biden's illegal migrant invasion. President Trump and I will not stand for it. That is interesting. That entire tweet, like it was very strange. But to Waz's earlier point, it does feel like this is something that the Trump administration can really get behind and support in a way that they can't with some of their other policies right now. Right now, I know we're going to get to this later on in the show, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but some of his other policies, specifically his tariff policy, he is seeing a he's plunging in the ratings right now. His approval rating is diminishing because of that. And because right now, things like the economy, it's harder and harder for the Trump administration to blame that on the Biden administration because everyone can see what Trump is doing to affect it directly. In this case, they still can just blame everything on the Biden administration and everybody's happy. So anyway, the Trump administration's refusal to return Abrego Garcia to the States is now landing other Republican lawmakers in very hot water. Yesterday at a town hall, attendees grilled Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley about Trump defying the Supreme Court, and it's crazy. Look at this.
You're gonna bring that guy back from El Salvador?
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, because that's not power of Congress.
Supreme Court said to bring him back.
Judges are,
Yeah.
and the president has that upholding the Constitution. He's defined the
You're on the
Constitution.
Judiciary Committee.
Trump don't care.
If I get an order to pay a ticket for $1,200 and I just say no, does that stand up? Because he's got an order from the Supreme Court and he just said no.
Yeah. He just said, screw it.
I'll be able to answer your question.
You ignored my letter.
The president of that country is not subject to our U.S. Supreme Court.
Trump wanted to bring him back. Bring him back. I'm pissed.
In case you missed it, what he said was that the president of this country is not subject to the Supreme Court, which is literally not how our government works. It's not how our government was designed to work, nothing. So today, Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen made it to El Salvador, where he was denied a meeting and a phone call with Abrego Garcia. Van Hollen and Salvadoran Vice President Felix Ulloa told him the government had no information connecting Abrego Garcia to MS-13, but could not accommodate a visit to the notorious CCOT prison. And here is some from Van Hollen at a press conference that he held today in El Salvador.
Well, I asked the vice president if Abrego Garcia has not committed a crime and the US courts have found that he was illegally taken from the United States, and the government of El Salvador has no evidence that he was part of MS-13. Why is El Salvador continuing to hold him in CCOT? And his answer was that the Trump administration is paying El Salvador, the government of El Salvador, to keep him at CCOT.
All right, so in addition to that, this is reporting from The Hill. It says Van Hollen said embassy staff members informed him that they have received no directive from the Trump administration to make outreach on Abrego Garcia's behalf, despite a Supreme Court order to facilitate his return. So that was a crazy response that we heard, not just from the vice president, but also from Senator Chuck Grassley. Also, I think this is also coming up later on in the show, but Jesse Waters on Fox News said that, this guy was obviously MS-13 because he was obviously wearing a Chicago Bulls hat or jersey, whichever one it was, as if like all of us weren't walking around wearing Chicago Bulls merch back in the 90s, right? So ultimately, this is making Republicans look really bad. We're seeing that backlash at these Republican town halls. That was a Chuck Grassley town hall. So you know that that's a very, very red district. So do you think Republicans at large are going to face any kind of backlash from their base over the Trump administration's decision not to abide by court orders? Because it really seems like it's bothering a lot of their constituents.
I think the minute that people realize that the immigration stuff is business as usual, there's going to be a backlash. I don't think it's particularly gonna be because some guys got deported that shouldn't have. I don't know that the Republican base really cares all of that much about due process for people they deem to be quote unquote illegal aliens. But I think when they do get around to noticing that there are no immigrants actually leaving the country, and I think JD kind of gives the game away, like he, in his parlance, in his statement, when he says, oh, we don't have the resources, and oh, we can't. Bro, you guys have majorities in the Senate and the freaking Congress, okay? Why don't you pass a bill appropriating more monies, more resources to ICE so that you guys can do your mass deportation? Put more money behind it. These guys are allocating, $1 trillion budget for the Pentagon and the military industrial complex. They're slashing benefits like Medicare. They're doing all kinds of stuff financially. Up the ICE budget while you're at it, okay? And if this is supposed to be about these allegedly horrible illegal aliens, why are we sending 6 ICE agents at a time to get Columbia students to deport them? Why are we doing this to student protesters of a foreign country's horrific government's actions? Why are we dedicating resources, these precious resources, to activists against the Israeli government and their regime in the Gaza Strip? Like these people have no leg to stand on. And the truth of the matter is, I promise you, if these guys rounded these folks up and just sent them back to El Salvador, Venezuela, people would be like, well, that's what we voted for. It's not what instead, they're doing this fake show of force. They're trying to look like tough guys. So they're sending them to these freaking prisons where people are dying all the time, being beaten to death. Sometimes they go starving. They're sending these people to concentration camps, essentially. Instead of just doing the thing they were elected to do, which is like, look, people do want to see deportations, but they're not doing that. So again, they have to do the show pony stuff in order to seem tough when realistically, again, go look at the deportation numbers. They're flat. Biden deported as much people as Trump did, which is insane when you really sit and think about this.
I mean, so much of this is insane. Like, there's so many different aspects of this story that it feels like you're being gaslit and just like spoken to like you're an idiot this whole time. And that's what our government's doing. This is coming from our elected leaders, which is, yeah, it's just like mind blowing the longer you sit in this space. And like, I know for us, we like live in this space. I know a lot of our audience members also live in that space. It's crazy. There's so much going on right now to consider. And yeah, you're absolutely right. This feels like a very fake show of force, right? They cannot look weak. They can't back down from anything, right? To the point where they can't, instead of just admitting that one person that they deported should not have been deported, which is honestly, it happens, right? Like sometimes things happen, things slip through the cracks. Even if you have such a tight operation running, one mistake, that's understandable, right? But as long as once you find out that you made that mistake, you have to rectify what you've done. But instead, they just have to double down to the point now that they're calling things like due process into question. And they're saying, you know what, look at how great these Salvadoran prisons are that we're sending all these people to. Trump said in an interview that they're great, they're a lot of fun. It's a really nice place to be. People want to be in these prisons. These prisons have been flagged by international human rights organizations for human rights violations for years. This is nothing new. So that's where we're sending our people, whether they're supposed to be there or not. Like, no one's supposed to be in a prison camp. But anyway, we're going to get to our first break, and we have a lot more on the other side. Be right back. All right, welcome to the social break. I'm here to read some of your comments. Let's see what you guys have for us here. All right. Michael from Oklahoma. Hi, Michael from Oklahoma. I'm from Texas. We're neighbors. Michael says Bondi puts the false in facilitate. That's fun. Virginia in South Carolina. I love these like geotag names, by the way. Virginia in South Carolina says, we are a nation of immigrants. What happened to we only want legal immigrants? No, they just don't want brown people to come here. And yeah, that was always the argument. It's like, no, I don't have a problem with immigrants, only the illegal ones. And then you ask these same people if they have any kind of understanding about what the legal process is to obtain citizenship or even to come to this country legally. And they have no concept of it. It is incredibly difficult for the people who are trying to come here legally. So maybe that's a whole nother topic of conversation. Maybe we should revisit that process. But we know that with this administration in power, that's never going to happen. Lobbyist for Big Poor says, I love this transparency in quotes of the White House. I don't think the world has ever seen this kind of transparency. Yeah, they say a lot of things, but it's not always the things that they should be saying. DOGE says this is going to be the standard Trump legal tactic, delay until the news cycle moves on. Yeah, that's kind of how it's been going for a long time. I would say maybe for 10 years. There's a lot of distraction, there's a lot of delays, there's a lot of just, keeping people's minds occupied elsewhere while they do whatever they want to do. Pee-wee's Dr. Mondo says, so according to our own VP, they can say F the laws and our constitution since they were voted in through our political process. Yale law man knows better, total gaslighting and anti-American. It is. It's like, that that the things that they're saying are not real, that this is all fake, that it's crazy. And then they keep insisting, no, you're the one who's crazy. You're the one who doesn't know what's going on. And it's just not true. So Shumbathe Marxist says, I've never been prouder to be from Iowa in my life. Thanks, TYT. You're welcome. I'm glad that, and I live in Texas and I do have a lot of Texas pride, but also it's like embarrassing. Like, I don't know. So I feel like I get it. Let's see, Uriah Heep said, I would say that North Korea has the worst concentration prison camps, but El Salvador ain't that far behind. Yeah, I mean, these prison camps in El Salvador have been very controversial for a very long time, as has Bukele. He's very popular in El Salvador because, he says that he's cleaned up a lot of the crime there, but his means of doing so have been more than questionable. So we'll be right back with more show. Welcome back to the show. You have Yaz and Waz here tonight in for Jenk and Anna, but we have a lot more show to get to. So let's get right into this next story. The Pentagon's Defense Digital Service, or DDS, has shut itself down effective at the end of this month. The DDS has been referred to as the Pentagon's very own SWAT team of nerds, which is fun. Before we get into why the DDS has decided to call it quits, here's some quick background information on what exactly they do, or what they did, really. The Defense Digital Service was created in 2015 to help the Pentagon adopt fast tech fixes during national security crises and push Silicon Valley style innovation inside the Pentagon. It built rapid response tools for the military during the Afghanistan withdrawal, databases to transfer Ukrainian military and humanitarian aid, drone detection technologies, and more. Without the program, some key efforts to streamline the DoD's tech talent pipeline and counter adversarial drones will be sunset, one soon to be former employee said. So it sounds, these people, they sound exactly like the kind of people that someone like Elon Musk would want to actually keep around. In fact, the only reason why this hasn't happened sooner is because the members assumed that they would eventually be called upon to aid Musk in his efforts to streamline government operations, integrate AI into government systems, and overall just help the government to run more efficiently. Jennifer Hay, the DDS director, said simply, the reason we stuck it out so long as we have is that we thought we were going to be called in. However, they soon realized that DOGE was really just trying to cut them off and shut them down. And so, seeing the writing on the wall, all 14 DDS members, including the director, have chosen to resign, with 11 employees opting to take Trump's deferred resignation package. On the collective decision to resign, Hay explained, the best way to put it, I think, is either we die quickly or we die slowly. which is very morbid, but it is what it is. That is the state of the world these days. So as for the disappointing realization that DOGE isn't all it claims to be, one former DDS official echoed sentiments that I know we've been expressing here for a while on TYT. They said they're not really using AI, they're not really driving efficiency. What they're doing is smashing everything. Yes, we know. So to that point, this isn't the only tech or efficiency-minded department that DOGE has targeted. According to Politico, several other digital modernization efforts within the government have met similar fates. The US Digital Service, which helped the government modernize its technology and attract tech talent, has now been subsumed by DOGE amid mass layoffs and firings. A program called 18F, a technology unit within the GSA, was eliminated by DOGE as well. As for the DDS functions, what they were actually doing there at the Pentagon, they're reported to be absorbed by the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office, which is the broader department that the DDS fell under. So this is very, very sad because almost all the people who at least spoke to Politico, what they said is that, they would not have quit their jobs. They wouldn't have left their jobs unless they felt the pressure from DOGE to do so. And so they succumbed to the pressure because, as they said, it was going to happen now on their terms or it was going to happen later on DOGE's terms. So it feels good to have a little bit of power, I guess, wherever you can find it, just take it. But it's really sad to see, though, what's happening here. And this particular department, I think, is worth talking about because they're exactly the kind of department that DOGE says they want to be in cahoots with, right? They were doing the type of things that DOGE says they want to do. And so in eliminating this department or pressuring them to quit, they're really just going against their own directive. What do you think?
Obviously, I echo your sentiments. There just doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the DOGE cuts. Like, I get it. Elon went into Twitter. He fired like 80% of the staff. People said Twitter would never be able to function that way. And Twitter mostly, it sucks as an experience, but it mostly does work still, right? And so Elon could be like, oh, you idiots told me not to fire all of these people. And guess what? I fired them and Twitter still works. Okay, cool. The government doesn't work that way, okay? You fire a bunch of air traffic controllers, people will die. Twitter doesn't work for a day. Okay, I can't get off some snazzy tweets for a few hours. Life goes on. You fire a bunch of government employees that are literally keeping the metaphorical trains running on time. There will be tangible problems in American citizens' lives. The DOD is no different. And this segment that was doing a lot of, kind of cybersecurity kind of stuff, again, no different. This is like the idea would be to be making these guys more efficient at their jobs, more effective at what they're tasked to do, not to like get them out of there. But this is sort of in line with the entire administration so far. You take the kernel of something that broadly, I think most Americans would support, just the idea that, the government might have some bloat. Like DOD itself, we might be buying, a surplus of weapons from some weapons manufacturer. We might be, some contractor is overbilling us for something that they're doing for us. Americans will broadly agree that the government has some bloat, we should probably cut it. They take that scintilla, that little kernel of truth, and do something completely ridiculous, stupid, haphazard, and anti-productive or counterproductive. Excuse me. Same with immigration. I myself am a first-gen American. My parents, all the people who raised me, are immigrants. I can understand people who in the last 4 years, 10 million new immigrants under Biden, border towns in Texas and Arizona, places like Chicago and New York, feeling like they're a bit overrun and overwhelmed. They don't have the capacity or resources to help these people get adjusted in American life. Being like, oh, maybe we kind of went overboard with the immigration stuff. We should probably send some people back. Again, that's not my opinion, but I can see somebody reasonably coming to that conclusion, and the Trump administration be like, all right, we're gonna run with that. Except instead of just being like, all right, we're gonna do more border security, people who don't have a legitimate process, as many of these asylum seekers or whatever, who don't have a legitimate claim. All right, sorry guys, you gotta go back to your country. Instead, no, Let's send these people with no due process to concentration camps and make a big show of it. And on we go with the tariffs. You can say, you know what? These trade deals from the 90s and the 70s, they screwed American workers. We want to bring manufacturing work back to America. In fact, we need the capacity to manufacture stuff, especially high-tech goods. If we ever get into an actual beef with somewhere like China, all right, we need this stuff. Instead, we get this blunt force instrument of tariffs across the board, no precision. They don't take a scalpel, they take a freaking sledgehammer to everything. And I hate to be this cliche anti-Trump administration person and call them stupid, call Republicans dumb. Oh, we're the smart side, we're the brainy side. I kind of like scoff at that notion a lot of times when liberals or leftists take that tact towards the right. But I'm sorry, this is dumb. And when it's not dumb, it's completely cruel. Like there's just no charitable way to look at any of this stuff.
Yeah. It's hard to not call it dumb when actual experts, economists, are also calling this dumb. And
conservative economists, conservative lawyers, conservative commentators are like, guys, I want to run with Trump on this. I don't. There's nothing there. There's no sense.
And we all saw that chart. And we had analysts look at the chart and they're like, where do they come up with these numbers? And also the numbers that they came up with, like just to get those numbers for one country would have taken so much research and so much data analysis. And then they're like, oh, here it is for like 200 different countries and we just did it. That's not how it works. But actually, Wosny did touch on something interesting. That's how cults work, when they take some kind of universal truth or some sentiment that no one would argue against, something like, we don't want our children to get trafficked. Obviously, who's going to argue with that? Or you say things like, we don't want the government to run inefficiently. Like, obviously, nobody wants their tax dollars to be spent in a dumb way. That's all that our democracy is really built on. That's why we have two parties. We say, I like how that party is going to spend my tax dollars versus how this party is going to spend my tax dollars. But then they take that and they say, you know what? If you don't support everything we're doing, then you obviously love inefficient government, which is crazy. And everybody knows it's crazy except for the people who fall for it. And that's the people who are in this, de facto cult. Well, I'm being nice when I say that. And it all just feels very inefficient too, which is the irony of all of this. In this particular case, they're firing the people at the DDS, or they're pressuring them to quit, right? These are the people who are doing real, good, tangible work, people who are actually doing things to help the government run more efficiently. And they're helping to integrate AI into the government. How does getting rid of those people make the government work more efficiently? Also, just in general, even if that wasn't their specific role, how does getting rid of more people help the government to run more efficiently? You're making more people do more work that they don't know how to do. That's just going to slow everything down. But you kind of touch on this too. The government is not a business. And I keep saying you're not supposed to run a government like a business because the goals are not the same. With a business, efficiency is king, right? You want to maximize your profits and you want to cut your costs as much as possible. Like nothing else really matters when it comes to a business. But with a government, you have to consider the people. You are governing people. You're not running a business. You're not managing money. That's a part of it, but it really is not the whole picture. So anyway, I do want to get on to this next story. So let's roll the tape on this one. Some good news.
Independents feel that Donald Trump has vacated the center of the electorate, catering to his base. What are we talking about? Well, let's talk about the overall net approval ratings. We're going to look at the worst ever at this point in a presidency. The old record among independents for the worst ever was Donald Trump back in 2016, a net approval rating of minus 16 points. Well, Donald Trump has broken his own record here. He now holds, in this particular term, the worst ever net approval rating at this point in a presidency among independents at, get this, minus 22 points.
I like this guy. I like his energy. I like the way he talks. But the numbers get even worse for Trump when you focus on the number one issue, the economy. Take a look.
Let's take a look at Trump's net approval rating on it and look at the trend line over just the last few months. You go back to January, he was slightly above water with independents at plus 1 point. Look at this drop, Kate. Oh my, minus 29 points. That's a 30-point drop in under 3 months of time. If you go back through the record books, I simply put, Kate Baldwin, can't find anything close to this. This is such a record that there is no historical analogy to be 29 points underwater on the most important issue of the day with independents. This right here, my dear friends, is political poison.
Oh my God, no historical analogy, political poison. What is behind these shockingly low numbers? You probably won't be surprised to find out that it is Trump's tariffs. They are a huge factor in all of this because, as I mentioned in the earlier story, there's no one else to blame but Trump for this one. So here's more from Enton.
A clear plan for tariffs and trade among independents. Look at this, 57% say no, he doesn't even have a clear plan for what he should be doing with tariffs and trade. And when asked whether or not they like the idea of additional tariffs, guess what percentage of independents say no, that they oppose it? It is 2/3. It is 66% of independents who oppose new tariffs. They don't like anything that's coming out of Donald Trump's right now, absent maybe immigration. But when it comes to the economy, when it comes to overall, when it comes to tariff, it's a threesome for negativity among independents. They oppose.
All right, so those numbers might look bad for Donald Trump, but today Enton actually reported on some good news for the president. So let's watch that.
I hear all these stories, all these articles, all the Trump voters, they regret what they did back in 2024. I'm here to tell you, very few of them regret what they did back in 2024. What are we talking about? Trump voters looking back at 2024, we got a new poll out. The poll was conducted this month. What percentage would change their vote to a different candidate? We're talking just 2%, just 2%. That's not even a wide spot on the road. And then you ask, okay, the same question to Kamala Harris voters, and it turns out the numbers are rather similar. So if there was a repeat, if folks got to be able to redo their vote that they had back in 2024, would the result be any different? I doubt it would be. Well, in February of 2017, 4% of Trump voters say they'd shift their vote. That's actually slightly more than the 3% this time around.
Was I think on the left, we want to hear that these Trump people, we want to believe that these Trump people are finally seeing the error of their ways. And we are seeing some stories like that coming out on social media, TikTok, on X, wherever. But on the whole, Trump supporters still very much support Trump. They still believe that he's going to pull out a win at the end of this, right? Sometimes in our leftist bubble, sometimes it can seem like that's not the case. But the reality is that it's very, very hard, especially at this point, the way politics is so polarized in this country. It is very rare to see somebody completely switch parties or completely switch ideologies. And also there's, the sunk cost fallacy that these people have invested so much of their time and energy, their entire personalities into supporting Trump, that it is a huge ask for people on the left to be like, can you just switch over? Like, do you finally get it? Do you think that there ever will be a mass exodus of people from supporting Trump to not supporting Trump? Or do you think that the left just needs to let go of that hope and move on and try to figure something else out?
I think there's a few things at work here. Donald Trump is a singular figure in the sense that many of the people that vote for him just like him personally. They don't care about what the policy is or how he's gonna get there. They just think he has a compelling personality. It is a cult of personality. And so again, folks gotta remember, Biden's fortunes didn't turn until 9 months into his presidency, after the Afghanistan war pullout, which obviously all of us supported, but it did tank his approval. He got killed in the media for this, and it kind of never turned around for us. It's been basically 3 months of Donald Trump. It's very, very, very early in the game. Another thing that people have to realize, as much as we've, like, everybody, experts, lay people, normal people, people with 401ks, people with, stock portfolios, et cetera, et cetera. As much as, everybody can recognize that these policy ideas, especially as it pertains to tariffs in the economy, are disastrous, the results haven't kicked in yet. We haven't had mass layoffs yet. We haven't had a stock market nosedive. We haven't had tangible, material effects of Trump's dumbheadedness yet. And so to expect people to feel like, oh, this guy's been a disaster when nothing's tangibly happened yet. No government agency that DOGE has cut funding to fail somebody, yet. Like, this stuff hasn't happened yet. There hasn't been some environmental disaster where the EPA could have stepped in and they didn't, or some kind of basically government oversight that wasn't in place because of DOGE, or people's stock portfolio and retirements get tanked. This stuff hasn't happened yet. And so I do think it's pretty early. And I think another example to think about is George W. Bush in 2004, 2005, after destroying John Kerry. He got reelected. Republicans ascended in both houses of Congress. And it just looked like, wow, we're gonna be Republican from now until kingdom come. And then what happened? Disastrous war in Iraq. Bush got cocky talking about privatizing Social Security, which obviously is a no-no. Got creamed for it. Katrina response, disaster, and then on and on and on. It went until by the time Barack Obama and the Dems run against the Republicans in 2008, like, George Bush is widely seen as the worst president ever. This, like, he went from literally feeling like the Republicans were gonna have majorities forever to this guy is a disaster to the point that we elected the first Negro in the history of the country. So folks need to realize that it's very early. A lot of the horrible nature of Trump's policies have yet to be felt by everyday people. But believe me, if this guy keeps it going with this China trade war, if he keeps it going with this harebrained, disgustingly evil immigration policy, like, if he keeps it going down this way, it's going to have an effect, I promise you.
Yeah, I agree, but it is interesting because Trump supporters, they won't believe that bad things are happening until it happens to them directly. Sometimes, right? They don't think that the economy tanking is a problem because their portfolios haven't been hit or their bank accounts or whatever, but they will believe that terrorists are just running rampant around the country, even though there hasn't been any reported terrorism, even though they haven't seen any terrorists, or even though they haven't been personally terrorized by anyone, really. So it really, like, they just pick and choose things. And the reason why they do it is because, like you said, it is a cult of Trump's personality, right? They have to support him. We're even seeing it from members of Congress, right? Where they come out not to defend democracy, not to defend the country, not to defend their constituents, but to defend the president. That's not how this country is supposed to work. And the Republicans, they do need to seriously start thinking about what's gonna happen if and when this guy is out of there, because presumably he'll be out of there within the next 4 years. I guess we'll see what happens there, but anyway, we do need to take our next break, so we will be right back. Hey everyone, welcome to the social break. Let's get to some of your comments and see what's going on. All right, Sassy Dragon says, just got here, Woz. Very excited to see Woz today. So some love for Woz in the comments. Art Guy says, well, this giant mural isn't gonna finish itself, so I'll listen while I work. Stay strong, everyone. That's so cool. I wish I could paint. I can't paint. I paint my walls, but there's no murals on it. But it would be really cool to see what you're working on. Ian Golbis says, the problem with this country is we have people who believe Musk is doing productive work. And I think that is a very encompassing statement to have made, because that is a big part of the country, a big part of the problem in this country, because it says so much about the things that we value, the things that we believe about the people in charge and about these billionaires. And I don't really know why people still fall for people like Elon Musk. Trump Loy, he says that's how it's pronounced, says, break it down, Woz. Yes, that's why we love to have him on the show. Eclectic Miscellaneous says, are Trump's poll numbers completely underwater, even from the standpoint of water? This is a very good question. We will ask Woz. We'll ask the water. Woz. I don't think Woz knows. Mark NYC says, oh, this is nice. Okay. Yaz is consistently correct when she points out that it's MAGA independence memory at election time that matters. Will Trump gaslight America when it counts for him? Likely. And yeah, I mean, like we all expect an October surprise, right? We all know that Trump is doing all this stuff at the very, very beginning of his term. I think Woz was kind of alluding to this also when he was speaking. He's doing all this right as soon as he gets into office because he's hoping that things will balance out by time election season comes up, even though he's not supposed to be reelected. He's not supposed to be up for reelection, but not just for him, but for the sake of the entire Republican Party. I think they're all hoping that this gamble pays off, or they're just going to pretend like it did, even if it didn't. So the verbose dragon says, does anyone else want to see the charts of Trump's approval numbers yeeting themselves off a cliff? Seeing the steep angles would be so much more satisfying than the numbers. That would be more fun. Maybe CNN can take a note from you. Let's see what's going on over at on Twitch. Conservative Wambulance says, 4 years subbing on Twitch. Love you guys. Thank you very much. And Suspicious Dragon 92 says, he's MS-13 equals he's just an obviously Hispanic male between the ages of 18 and 35. That's what MS-13 means to Republicans. And I hope that isn't true, but it might be. Be right back. Welcome back to the show. You have Yaz and Woz in tonight without Cenk and Anna. They're not here tonight, but let's get into this next story.
New data coming out from the U.S. government yesterday that showed a 10% drop in March of non-citizens arriving at U.S. airports. And it won't surprise you probably to know that the biggest year-over-year declines were from Canadians, people flying in from Mexico, and from Europe.
All right, so as part of the fallout from Trump's tariffs, as well as his incessant provocation of the Canadian people, i.e. his threats to annex them and his accusations that they're funneling fentanyl into our country, et cetera, travel into the US from foreign countries, specifically Canada, Mexico, and Europe, is down in a very big way. So big, in fact, that according to experts, the US economy is expected to lose billions of dollars in 2025 in lost revenue from tourism and boycotts of American products. Last month, arrivals of non-citizens into the US by plane dropped by almost 10%. Also, Goldman Sachs has estimated that in the worst case scenario, accounting for both travel and purchasing boycotts, the US could see a total hit of 0.3% to gross domestic product, which translates into a whopping $90 billion loss. So 0.3% doesn't sound like a lot, but it's $90 billion. According to the International Trade Administration, or the ITA, the US took in a record $254 billion last year from international travelers. And prior to all of this Trump drama that we're experiencing right now, projections for 2025 and 2026 were expected to meet and then exceed pre-pandemic levels of travel from non-citizens. And we're already starting to see the effects starting to play out. In March, hotel rates and airfares and car rental costs, those all dropped. And the Northeast was hit particularly hard, presumably because Canadians aren't visiting that region anymore. So looking ahead to this summer, Canadian flight reservations to the US are down 70% through September compared to the same period last year, and Europe to US bookings are down 25%. Reports of longer wait times at customs and immigration, as well as stories of detentions, like harsh detentions of European travelers in American airports, could also be contributing to these declining air sales. And business travel also looks to be impacted. It's not just pleasure travel. So let's look at that.
But we've also recently seen moves in corporate travel start to show up. We reported last night and yesterday afternoon AIMCO, the Alberta Pension Fund, has told its staff that it will be curbing trips to the U.S. They'll be able to go for some reasons, but not for like conferences and speaking engagements. And last night we reported that the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, a pretty major research hospital in Canada, has advised the staff not to go to the U.S. and has given them all sorts of advice about what to do if they do have to go to the U.S. in terms of like, cleaning up their laptop and taking a burner phone that doesn't have your personal data on it. It's somewhat hard to believe we're talking about this in the realm of Canadian-U.S. travel, but that's where we are. And as long as people remain concerned, it's likely these numbers are going to be soft.
Well, I think this is really sad. I love Canada. I love visiting Canada. I go to Canada a lot, actually, because I have a lot of family there. And I'm originally from Connecticut. And so when I was younger, we used to just drive up to Toronto all the time. I've seen Niagara Falls so many times, like more times than anyone needs to see this one particular waterfall. But I've been to Niagara Falls so many times. And it is sad, but I can't say that I blame the Canadians for not wanting to come to the United States anymore. The reasons as to why all of this is happening is very obvious. But do you think that Trump considered that this might happen, that this might be like a side effect when he was rolling out all of these tariffs and bullying other countries, especially when he was antagonizing the Canadians? Like they're right there. Why would you be so mean to them? And it's such a beautiful country too. Or do you think this is just part of like the short-term pain before we get to see the long-term gain that he keeps promising us?
No, he didn't consider it. And no, nobody on his team pushed back. Stephen Miller is in charge of his immigration regime, right? Like this guy is a maximalist, anti-immigration person. So no, nobody brought this to attention. I don't think Trump actually gives a damn about any of this. I think he does have some level of racial resentment, anti-immigration, like an instinct for that. But I don't think he cares about this stuff as much as he does the tariffs. Like he's been talking about tariffs for 40 years, literally since the 80s. Back then he was complaining about the Japanese allegedly ripping us off because Americans prefer Toyota and Honda to freaking, I don't know, Saturn or whatever, right? And so I don't think anybody told him this. And as far as like Canadians and Mexicans, okay, first of all, Canada, like our country, is a very multicultural country. If you find out that these idiots are just grabbing people off the street who might be Palestinian or who might vaguely be Middle Eastern and against or be accused of being anti the Israeli government's regime in the Gaza Strip, and you could get snatched up, put in some freaking holding cell and be treated like some damn criminal, why the hell would you come to America? Now, if you're a white bread, you probably got nothing to worry about, but at the same time, like again, Canada is a very multicultural and diverse country. Same for Mexico. These are brown people. They're rounding up Venezuelans and El Salvadorians and Mexicans. Okay, they're rounding up people that they identify as vaguely Hispanic or Latin. And just what if you get mistaken for a Salvadorian and you're Mexican? And they send you to literally a gulag where dudes are beating you up and starving you to death. Why the hell would you voluntarily come up here to vacation at that, to have fun? Now, there are people, that risking their lives, their safety to come up here, make money for their family and stuff like that. And you understand why they're making a certain kind of sacrifice. Did I freeze for you guys?
Yeah, you did. All right, so we'll get back to Woz in a little bit, but yeah, to Woz's point, it is very dangerous to travel to this country now. And there's been a lot of reports specifically for international travelers coming from Europe, from France and Germany, who said that they've been harassed in American airports. Who wants to deal with that? Who doesn't have to deal with it? And also, I would say that I don't think Trump really considered the loss of international tourist money as much as he probably should have, because I feel like he's so arrogant that he's like, well, of course they'll come. Of course they'll still want to come here. This is the greatest country in the world. So anyway, Woz, are you back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, do you want to finish your thought?
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, as a Haitian American, if they were rounding up a bunch of Jamaicans, even if I'm not Jamaican, I'd be like, damn, I'm pretty adjacent to that. Like, I would not be coming to this country. Like, straight up, if you're a Mexican person and you're not coming here to make money, you're coming here to spend money in our economy. Enjoy yourself, vacation, sightsee, enjoy some of the beautiful things our great country has to offer. And you hear they rounded up Salvadorians, rounding up Venezuelans, no due process, treating anybody as if they're hardened criminals. Hell no. I'm staying my ass where I'm at. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. I mean, I'm a brown woman. My family,
Better watch out.
see, like it's weird, because like I was born in Connecticut. My family's from Guyana in South America, so it's like I'm not Middle Eastern. I'm not anything that like would turn up on a terrorist watch list, but I look like what I look like because I'm Indian.
Close, hey man, keep your papers close. You close enough.
Like
they
these
for your
racist people,
ass.
like they're not the most like geographically, historically intelligent. Also, that's in my own experience. If you're gonna be racist, like you're probably just like you don't know what you're talking about. So, anyway, on that note, on that pleasant note, we're gonna wrap up this first hour. I think who do you have? John and Brett in the next hour. So that'll be fun for you guys. All right. So we'll see you next time. Bye.